Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here today. I want to explore an issue, actually get help with an issue that constituents want to understand, and so do I. I don't understand it. And it refers to the primacy, or has relevance to the primacy of energy costs in the budget. I'm hoping to get into a relatively complex area and get your evidence or confirmation on how the Renewable Energy Shortfall Charge under the Renewable Energy Electricity Act works. If you could bring anyone to the table who has expertise in that.
Sure. Mark Williamson has expertise.
What's the name?
Mark Williamson, Executive General Manager. The renewable energy target works where...
Well, I have some questions, so...
Oh, sorry. You
that's
go
fine.
straight to the questions.
Thank you, Mr Williamson. If I can try to step my way through the legislation here, and you can pick me up where I'm wrong or missing something. The Renewable Energy Shortfall Charge applies to liable entities.
Correct.
Correct. Which is defined in sections 35, 31, 32 and 33, and essentially talks about entities who make or that make a wholesale acquisition of electricity.
Yes, for simplicity, Senator, these are typically electricity retailers.
Retailers?
Yes.
Wholesalers?
Correct. The electricity retailers are typically the liable parties.
Oh, okay, they're the liable party because they sell it to the end user.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, that's great.
Or large users,
Yeah.
people directly purchasing electricity.
Oh, so large users who buy direct, they can also be facing these
Correct.
charges. Okay. Let me just see now. Can I just confirm or get you to explain who the liable entities for the Renewable Energy Shortfall Charge are in simple terms? Again, retail or large users with direct...
Well, Senator, the renewable energy target I need to frame and explain for you. It sets an obligation on these retailers or large users who are buying direct to each year surrender to us a certain number of large-scale generation certificates or small-scale technology certificates. Those amounts are based on percentages set each year in regulation by the Minister, and effectively, if you're an electricity retailer, you take your acquisitions of electricity in megawatt hours, you multiply it by those percentages, and that tells you the number of certificates you need to surrender to us. If a liable entity does not surrender the certificates or surrenders less than they should have, that makes them liable for the shortfall charge.
Okay. So it's not power generators, not wholesalers, it's just retail and also large consumers, as Mr Parker said.
Correct, and they're only liable for the shortfall charge if they do not surrender enough certificates to us to meet their renewable energy target liability.
Can you talk me through the large-scale generation certificates that you just mentioned? What are they and what is the effect of surrendering them for that company?
Large-scale generation certificates are issued for each accredited power station that's from a renewable energy source.
So solar or wind, for example?
Correct. Hydro as well is quite common. And they get a certificate for every net megawatt hour of generation. Those certificates can be used on the demand side to acquit liability, so they can be sold to electricity retailers or big users, or they can be voluntarily cancelled to prove the use of renewable energy. So, for example, you may have heard Green Power, the Green Power scheme. That operates in a way that people or businesses who want to have more renewable energy use proven other than just the statutory renewable energy target, they can buy and cancel large-scale generation certificates.
Okay. So coal-fired power station would not get them?
That's correct,
definitely
they
not.
don't.
Solar and wind would. And purchasers must buy at least 18.64% right now of solar and wind power, or hydro.
Effectively, that's the case. In other words, those electricity retailers or big users, I think that percentage you've mentioned is the renewable power percentage. So, yes, they multiply their electricity acquisitions by that percentage. That tells them the number of certificates they have to cancel to us.
Right, okay, thank you. I've got some figures in front of me about the renewable power percentage. So I'll just go through them. In 2001 it started, so that's 22 years ago. It was just 0.24%, about 1/4%. Then it went up the following year. Again, you mentioned this is ministerial direction, a directive.
Senator, the Minister sets these percentages on calculations we do each year, but they're set at the actual targets are set in the Act, the Renewable Energy Electricity Act. So there was a certain number of gigawatt hours of generation each year that was set in the Act. That got to the target, which is 33,000 gigawatt hours, which the set in the legislation from 2020, and that same number continues to 2030. And that 33,000 gigawatt hour target was reset in mid 2015 by Parliament. So in the early stages of the scheme, there was effectively a table in the Act that set the numbers that dictated where that percentage would be set.
Is that table subsection 39(1) of the Act?
Senator, I'd have to ask my
does it provide...
colleague, the General Counsel, to try to find the right part of the legislation, but...
So, if it is, while we're waiting for confirmation, in 2001 it was 0.24, for 2002 the following year it was 0.62, then had slow increments, mild increments, until 2010. It took 10 years to get to 5.986%. And then from 2011 onwards it rose to, in 11 years, to 18.64. So 5.6% in the first 10 years, 13% in the next increase in the next 11 years.
So these were legislated increases. That was the way the scheme was designed, Senator?
Okay, thank you. So I want to understand this because, first of all, I focus mainly on the climate because I haven't found anyone who can give me the science that proves the need for this. But I haven't focused on the energy. That's where I want to go in the future. So that means resolving some of the complexities. So I want to understand this because we always hear that it's the market, that's forcing coal-fired generators out and that no one likes coal. Yet it appears to me with this Renewable Energy Shortfall Charge, a fine if you like, that it's actually the government forcing the retail buyers and the end users and the retail sellers, and the end users to buy wind and solar energy, or they'll be essentially faced with this fine. Is that correct?
Senator, the construct of the scheme is that the retailers should buy the certificates. The shortfall charge is only where they do not choose to or they're unable to get the certificates they need. So it's the default mechanism, right. But the way the scheme works is the retailers should get in and should be buying renewable energy. That should bring through more renewable energy, and that's the way the scheme has worked.
So have you ever... It appears deceptive from one perspective. I'm not accusing you of doing that, but it appears deceptive from one perspective. Hidden in the complex legalese, have you ever advertised to the public that the government, through you, is forcing wholesale electricity purchases, retail purchases and large end users to purchase more and more wind and solar?
Senator, we don't do specific broad community education.
Okay, thank you.
But all of this is regularly published. It's published by other bodies such as the Australian Energy Regulator, the Australian Energy Market Commission. So this is, generally well known that there's an obligation on the electricity retailers. But as I said, a lot of electricity users are choosing to buy green power and choosing to go further than the minimum statutory target.
So what we've got is a consumer faced with the choice of buying electricity. If they don't buy adequate amount or proportion of solar and wind, then they will have to pay a charge in addition to the subsidies that the solar and wind producers are
no,
getting.
Senator, the obligations sit with electricity retailers. There are a lot of electricity retailers. They should, in a competitive market, they should source the certificates at the best price they can and have the lowest level of input cost for the renewable energy target.
My point, Mr Williamson and Mr Parker, and you can correct me or confirm, is that, in my opinion, now that I have it clarified, this is the most significant intervention in the electricity markets that the government has ever conducted. Not just this government, but previous governments as well. By regulation, ministerial directive, by legislation, they're ratcheting up the percentage of renewable electricity that every electricity buyer has to buy or face a fine over the course of 20 years.
Senator, let me clarify again. The underlying numbers that lead to those percentages are locked in the Act. So, so Parliament took a decision to lock those numbers in. We do calculations, complex calculations, to convert that to a percentage. Those are put to the Minister. The Act, sets out the things the Minister must consider. So this is all set in legislation that was passed in Parliament.
Thank you for affirming that yet again. My mistake. I thought I said in the Act, but maybe I didn't. But doesn't this confirm that solar and wind are much more expensive? We've all been hearing the fluff that says people are going away from coal because it's more expensive. Solar and wind get subsidies, plus if someone buys coal-fired power, then they can be up for a charge. Or sorry, the retailers can be up for a charge, or the large end users. So doesn't this really confirm that without subsidies and without a throttle on the competition, coal-fired competition, that wind and solar is too expensive?
Well, not in my view, Senator. I wouldn't agree with that at all.
On what basis?
Well, these are the incentives. There are incentives in the form of those certificates, the large-scale generation certificates, go to the generators.
Solar and wind generators?
Correct. So effectively, who benefits depends on the nature of often power purchase agreements between those solar and wind power station operators and the retailers. But in essence, the numbers, if you look at Australian Energy Market Operators' quarterly market dynamics report, every time wind and solar is setting the price in the wholesale electricity market, the prices are very low, in some cases in negative territory. So it's quite clear that, in fact, the wind and solar is driving down wholesale electricity prices, which is also an input to retailers and to all of us as consumers.
I would say that's an aberration, and what's happening is that coal is actually being forced out by the governments, and I say plural, governments. It's a direct market intervention in addition to the subsidies, and the subsidies enhance solar and wind. The charge slams coal.
Senator Roberts, in your questions just now and indeed yesterday, you mentioned subsidies. Are there any particular subsidies you're interested in? Because I think it's been challenging sometimes for witnesses to engage with your questioning because you don't name them, and I'm just unclear what you're referring to.
Subsidies on solar and wind.
Issued by whom?
Federal government, state governments.
So is there a program in particular you're seeking information?
No, I haven't got any one in particular.
I see. Okay. Please go on.
And Senator Roberts, I'm going to wind you up as well. We can come back to you.
Okay, I'd just make the point that the market is not abandoning coal. The government is forcing buyers to not buy coal. That's the point.
Thank you for your statement.
And thank you very much,
Senator
Mr
Cadell.
Williamson, for clarifying.
Over to you.
Slightly